Google has just made it incredibly important for you to think even harder about your podcast's website. Listen up. Hello and welcome to another Podcast Pontifications with me, Evo Terra. Mark the day in your calendar, kids, May the 9th or the 8th, depending on where you are in the world. Early May 2019, Google has just fundamentally changed how podcasting will be discovered. And it's no big surprise. We've known it was coming for the longest time, but Google has done it. They have finally incorporated podcast episode search results in listings that you can play directly from the SERP, the search engine results page. Working right now on mobile devices, working right now on desktops. Rolling out everywhere eventually, but it's starting right now. So as I made a joke on Twitter early this morning, and that was, back in 2004, the way you had to discover a show was the way you could listen to a podcast. When someone said, hey, you've got a podcast? I want to listen to it. Like that ever happened in 2004. But for the rare occasions when that did happen, you'd have to get them to download some software. You'd have to then say, here's the RSS feed that if you look at it, it's gobbledygook code. Sorry about that. But if you give that RSS feed to the software you downloaded, that software will then download the latest episode of my show, and then you can take that and then transfer it onto your mobile device, and then you can listen, which was kind of a pain in the butt. And then 2005 rolled around and Apple came out with making iTunes have podcasting, and it was slightly less complicated, but still a long process. Now, early May 2019, you tell someone tells you, I want to listen to your podcast. You simply tell them, go Google it. Seriously, if you Google right now, podcast pontifications, you will see this, and you'll see right below there in Google's SERP, search engine results page, play options. You can click play. It'll play right there in the browser. Now, actually, it goes to a different page, but nonetheless, it's playing and without even having to go to the website. So that's interesting. But what I've noticed with this, and remember, this is very early days. And it relates to the whole theme I've been doing this week of changing my mind about things. What I've noticed is that the website for the podcast itself is really, really important. Now, here's what I mean by that. So if you do go Google podcast pontifications, you will see the first result, my domain, podcastpontifications.com. And underneath that, you'll see a listing of the 3 or 4 most recent episodes I've produced, because Google's indexing this stuff really quickly. And you searched for podcast pontifications. Google knows you're looking for this particular show. You might search your own show. You might have to put the word podcast behind it because it depends on what you did it. But it shows up, mine show up associated with my domain names and a bunch of other results below. Apple's down there and probably Stitcher and Spotify and a bunch of other ones are down there, all about podcast pontifications. Not the only result. Google shows lots of results. But when I was searching for my clients' podcasts, I noticed that in almost all cases, while episodes are showing the actual play link in the SERP, when I search on my client's name podcast, they show up. They're oftentimes not associated with the primary domain of my client. So I did a little further researching because I had an idea, an inkling in my mind of what was happening. So I did a little further searching, and I'm pretty sure that I figured out what's happening today. Here's what I think is happening. I think that Google is putting its emphasis and deciding to connect the dots when there's a dedicated website, not just a web page on an existing website, but a dedicated web page, a dedicated domain name, something.something. That's it. That is dedicated for that podcast name. When it does that, when it can recognize, when Google can see, hey, there is a podcast domain by that name, and I have podcast episodes by that name, clearly they're connected, let's link them together. Because when it's not happening, what I'm seeing is quite often the first result when I search for client podcast name, the first result is that web page on their website where they link to their podcast episodes. And then underneath that, typically 1 or 2 down, is the Apple Podcast link. And the episodes for the show are tied to the Apple Podcast listing in the SERP, not back to the domain. Now, this is deep in the weeds stuff, and the reality is people are going to listen, so you kind of don't care. But you kind of do if you're a brand. So what this is telling me, what I have been doing previously that I'm now going to change, and I'm going to be even more stringent about when I talk to my clients, is the importance of establishing a domain for your podcast. Your podcast needs to have its own domain. Now, here's the great thing. Here's what I've noticed. You don't have to go through the trouble of building an entire website with all your episodes and an about page and that kind of stuff. Because Podcast Pontifications, it's a one-page website. Podcastpontifications.com is a single page. There are no multiple pages. All of the episodes don't live at podcastpontifications.com. They live on a page that's generated by my media host, Libsyn, podcastpontifications.libsyn.com. That's where the actual episodes live. But I own podcastpontifications.com. I've built a single page. I put some links. I put some work out there to make sure people know about that page. And I've told my RSS feed, here's the trick, I've told my RSS feed that that's the main page, that's the URL, and it says, okay, great. When I've done this searching, I've done some tests. I did Choiceology. Choiceology is a show that is fantastic, but it's by Charles Schwab. You search Google right now for Choiceology podcast. You'll get the first listing for Choiceology, the website. Actually, it's not a website. You get the first listing is for charlesschwab.com /podcast. But there are no episodes. You have to scroll down 2 more spots before you can see the Apple podcast listing with the episodes attached to it. And I did a bunch of other searches as well, doing the same thing. And what I've determined is if you have a dedicated website, not just a page on an existing website, but a dedicated, this is the name of my podcast dot something. I don't care if it's .com or not. That is how you get them associated with it. So the recommendation I'm going to have to all my clients right now is remember the time we talked about building a dedicated web page, a website, for your show? We need to do that. A single page will do it today. A single page will do it. You don't even have to host the media files on that page or even link to the media files on that page, I don't think. I don't think so, because I don't. It looks like you need, according to Google, which makes perfect sense, you need a dedicated domain more so than a page on a website. And if you have been working with Google as long as I have, that makes perfect sense. Perfect sense. Of course, we don't know how this thing's going to shake out. We're not done yet. This just got dropped within the last, 12 hours, something like that, and it's going to change quite a lot. But still, it's a really good idea for your podcast to have its own website, even if that website is a single page. That's better than having a page on an existing website with lots of domain history, with lots of authority, lots of that. That's all fine. You probably still need that page there. But it looks like now you need a separate domain that has just that show on it. Who knows what's going to happen next with this fun little Google world? I know it's tough to keep up with these changes. If you need help keeping up with the changes, get in touch with me. I am happy to help you with that. evo@podcastlaunch.pro. You can go to podcastlaunch.pro to see a list of all the services I offer to my clients. And I shall be back, not tomorrow because it's Friday tomorrow. I'll see you on Monday for another Podcast Pontifications. Cheers.